tuition is one of the most important things for me to be epically focused on within my business, because that's the money that truly stays completely inside my business and goes towards making it run. And we did it with math and numbers as opposed to gut feelings and what we thought people might pay. And that is a much better way to do it. You have to budget correctly, because very, very quickly, a $20 oopsie, a $100 oopsie times 100 kids adds up very, very quickly. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cheer Biz Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Conn, and today we are going to be diving into why I am focusing on my pricing as I head into the new season. Now, before we get into the episode, please head over to Cheer Gym Owners on Facebook and make sure you have joined that group, and also All-Star Cheer Coaches and Owners, and you've joined that group on Facebook as well. And if you're looking to learn more about how you can get help determining your pricing and setting yourself up for success next season in 2025, I want you to head on over to nextgenowners.com and go to the book a call, where you can get on the phone with our team and you can learn more about what it means to join the academy and how we can help you in your business. And if you're looking to dive into this without going into the academy and joining the academy, or you're an academy member who's looking to dive into this a little bit deeper on your own, I have actually just released my book on pricing. The title is Charge What You're Worth, the Cheer Pricing Handbook. It is now available on Amazon and Audible. It also comes with a number of resources that are online. So if you buy the book, you can get access to all of those resources on the website for the book as well. Now, why am I talking about pricing, and why am I focused on pricing as I head into the 2025-2026 season? As I mentioned, I wrote a book on this. And in writing the book, I did a lot of research on what are the industry norms. I developed a pricing calculator that I tested very thoroughly. And we are headed into a new building in 2025. We're moving into a new space. It is more expensive. So for those of you who follow the podcast regularly, you know my rent right now is around $23,000 a month. And the new space we're headed into, it's going over 30 grand a month. So over $30,000 a month in rent, which is astronomical. And then on top of that, you have payroll and you have a number of other things. But beyond that, I realized that I really needed to do the same deep dive I was recommending for gym owners to do within their own businesses in my own. Even though I'd written the book on pricing, I needed to put the same principles I was teaching into practice again. You have to actually do this somewhat regularly. If you don't consistently reevaluate and recalculate your pricing, you're going to actually get into a bad position very quickly. And there are a couple different areas of pricing that I want you to really focus on as you head into your next season. So first and foremost is tuition. Your tuition being what is paid to the gym that stays within the gym. Now, I've done other episodes on all-inclusive tuition and why I don't recommend it. But if you do some sort of all-inclusive tuition, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about tuition is I'm talking about what is paid to the gym that stays within the gym. That does not go towards paying for uniforms or competition fees or anything like that. When I'm talking about those things, I generally refer to those as assessments. That's the language that I use. And I know we all have our own different terminology and language for those kind of things, but that's what I'm referencing. So the first thing I'm focused on is tuition, and tuition is one of the most important things for me to be epically focused on within my business, because that's the money that truly stays completely inside my business and goes towards making it run. And so I need to dive into all of the considerations. And actually in this process, and part of the reason I become so passionate about pricing in general is I've seen so many people price inappropriately. And I actually realized, I know the book just came out, I made a slight error in the book and in the calculator, because the calculator has you account for the payroll for your teams, and it has you account for your overhead expenses, and it actually has you subtract your payroll, because we calculate what you need to charge in tuition for each team and programming you have. But the error that I made was that I didn't account for taxes and workers' compensation insurance within the payroll portion. And payroll, oftentimes your taxes are going to come out of that. And this actually came up because Tori and I were discussing what our payroll was. And she gave me a number, a very, very big number of what we have in payroll every month. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. I didn't know that was our payroll. I thought it was lower than that. And she was like, nope. I mean, that's what we're paying out every month. It's this much, every couple weeks. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. And then as we were talking, she was like, well, that also includes your payroll taxes and your other things that are coming out on top of the actual payroll itself, because you have your payroll and then you have your additional taxes that you're going to pay. At least in our state. Now, it may vary from state to state, but that's my understanding. And that was kind of a light bulb aha moment of like, oh, shoot, we weren't accounting for those. And although it can be a very minor difference, it can also add up very, very quickly. And I actually made the exact same mistake this summer when I was putting together my budget for dream camps. I actually messed up my budgeting for dream camps. And one of the reasons was I made all of my staff employees rather than independent contractors. And I didn't account for in my budgeting payroll taxes. And those payroll taxes ended up being about an additional $12,000 that were paid out by the company, because there's the company side of payroll tax and then there's the employee side of payroll tax that they pay. And that ended up being a pretty significant chunk of change that I had not budgeted or planned for. I was like, shoot, that really stung. I knew that headed into this new season that we needed to really dive into our tuition, and we really needed to get into the granular detail of how to set our tuition. And I'm going to give you my recommendations because this comes up a lot where people are going, how do you set your prices? How do you set your prices for your assessments? How do you set your tuition without knowing what enrollment you're going to have? It makes it really difficult. And what a lot of people do is they try to guess or estimate, but really they're just guessing of we're going to have this many kids in our elite program and this many kids in our prep program and this many kids in our novice. And they generally use the current season as some sort of a barometer of what they expect to have. Now, this becomes easier when you have history on your side. So for us, it is a little simpler in the sense of we've gone, okay, we can look at historically, we've had this much enrollment every year. So we're comfortable within that ballpark enrollment. But even then, I still don't want to calculate it based off of that larger set. What I want to calculate it on is making sure each team is profitable. And so I do that in a very specific way. So you want to make sure that you're calculating off of each team being profitable. And the key considerations for making each team profitable, and I break this down way further in the book, is you want to make sure that one, you're covering the team's payroll. So you have to include all payroll that is related to the team. I would highly suggest you're including your front desk staff, some sort of percentage of that, and the payroll for the team. If owner's compensation is coming out of those team fees, that might be something you also consider in the payroll there. So you've got to consider what the payroll is per month. And then you have to consider what percentage of operating expenses, aside from payroll and all-star kind of fees that go out, what percentage of that you expect that program to cover. Now, there's a couple ways to calculate this, but generally speaking, it would either, you can do it as that program represents X percentage of revenue. Therefore, that X percentage of revenue should cover the same percentage of operating expenses. Or you would say that program takes up X percentage of business hours we are open. Ergo, it should cover that percentage of overhead. Now, what I'm talking about with overhead is I'm talking about those other fees. So your rent, your electricity, your heat, your iClass or Jackrabbit or whatever software you're using, membership, your reoccurring subscriptions, your garbage, all of those other things that are every single month you're paying for them that don't include the payroll and don't include the all-star assessments, because the all-star assessments we're charging for separately and the payroll we're accounting for separately. So we're making sure we know that that team is profitable. So the remaining expenses We're determining what percentage of those remaining expenses it's going to cover. And from there, we're going to take those two things, we're going to add them together. So you're going to get a number. And now you can divide this by the number of teams you think you're going to have, which again is for us, we go with a ballpark estimate. We know historically we've had 6 elite teams. So we're pretty comfortable saying we'll have 6 elite teams. And then you're going to take that and you're going to say, this is my bare minimum number of athletes I will take on this team. So I will not field a team if it is less than this number of athletes. That is very critical to set your minimum number enrollment, because you will quickly become upside down if you set it as like, oh, well, we're going to have 16 kids on the team, and then you take 11, but you set your pricing off of 16. So you have to set your bare minimum. You won't field a team without that number. And that number is going to be very important as we calculate your assessments and as we calculate other things moving forward. So you set your bare minimum, and then you're going to divide the total number of the operating expense it's supposed to cover and your payroll divided by the number of athletes that your bare minimum going to have. And that's going to tell you your baseline amount. And then from there, you need to add a profit margin. This should, because we've calculated for everything above, this should be a true profit margin. So some people might recommend on average a 30% profit margin is very healthy. And I think that's great. It may be hard to do in your all-star assessments, but again, because we've covered everything else and we are going to account for our assessments and other things later, because we've covered everything else, I'm actually okay with my all-star tuition profit margin being a little bit lower right now because it's already going up. So for me, a 10 to 15% profit margin added on to that tuition, and then that gives me my final tuition amount. Now, why am I okay with a 10 or a 15%? Because I know some people are going, no, Dan, that's not okay. When I'm talking profit, I mean this is profit. In cheer, we oftentimes take profit and then that is used to cover a bunch of other things. So, oh, well, we take out of the profit to cover our front desk and we take out a profit to cover this, that, and the other thing. No, I'm talking about profit. Like it actually is going into a profit account as profit. And in our industry, I think it's pretty hard to keep pricing where it needs to be to encourage enrollment and have a true 30 to 50% profit margin, especially on all-star tuition. I have not found that to be super feasible in our area. And I am all for charging what you're worth. So that is how I go about calculating my tuition. And I would highly recommend you do this for each program. So we calculate it for All-Star Elite, and then we calculate it for our classic program, which is our prep and our novice teams. And then we calculate it for our cheer abilities program. And we do the same thing for our class pricing and our stunt program pricing. So we do that for every single one to determine what it is we should be charging. Now, the great thing is when we went through this, we found we weren't too far off, but we also found 100% it backed up our decision of where we needed to raise our tuition to, because we're moving into a new building. Our overhead is going up almost $10,000 in rent. So that's a pretty significant jump, which means we've got to raise our pricing accordingly. And the nice thing was it also confirmed that our pricing has been set correctly overall in the past. So it verified we've been on the right path, but it also set the tone for where we needed to go in the future. And we did it with math and numbers as opposed to gut feelings and what we thought people might pay. And that is a much better way to do it, because if we just gone with like gut feelings, we probably would have landed around the tuition that wouldn't have had any sort of profit built in. And the only way we would have been able to get those teams to a point where we were generating any sort of profit is if we had more than our minimum enrollment. And oftentimes that can like get offset by some teams being slightly below, etc. So our goal is to always make it so every single team is profitable. Now you may be saying, well, what about having a larger team? Doesn't that make that team more profitable? Yes, it actually does. Larger teams in general are more profitable for our business. We also do invest more heavily in those teams. So like we'll have a higher payroll because we put more coaches on that team. But generally speaking, your larger teams are just generally a little bit more profitable for the gym, which is why one of the reasons I'm such a big fan of them, not just that I think they're really fun to coach. So that's tuition. Tori and I think spent 3 hours working on tuition yesterday, more than that actually, but it was great. It was really stressful for a period of time because we were like looking at these numbers and like, oh my gosh, they're so big, they're so stressful. But then as you break it down and you figure it out, it gives you more and more confidence that you're on the right path. So that's the number one thing I'm focused on from a pricing perspective is my all-star tuition. My number two thing that I'm focused on from a pricing perspective is my assessments. And this is incredibly important to get right because you can get wrong and in the negative really, really fast when it comes to your assessments. And I was actually just going through this with a client yesterday. I know that they were a little bit frustrated because they made an error this last year. They made two errors. One is that they didn't have markup on enough of the items. And two was that they set their pricing and then they discounted from the top pricing, the correct pricing, and then they discounted to incentivize things like pay in full instead of doing it the way I would recommend. So when we are calculating assessments, there's two different kinds of assessments you need to figure out. There are your assessments that are going to be calculated per athlete. And so those are going to be the individual athlete assessments, things like uniforms, things like bows, things like practice outfits, things that we can truly calculate per person only. And then there are things that are not charged in that manner, things like music and things like choreography. So those things, we're going to go back to that minimum number of athletes we're going to have on the team, and we're going to use that to set our pricing. Now, every single assessment should have profit margin built into it. And here's why. And you guys, I'm saying this, and I know for a fact that I have parents from my gym who listen to the podcast. And I still am confident saying every assessment should have a profit margin built into it because that is how you run a functional company. Nothing is given at cost, ever, generally speaking. And the reason is threefold. So let's talk about uniforms for a second. Why would I not give uniforms to people at cost? Because there is a significant amount of labor that goes into the distribution of uniforms. Additionally, you're buying a product with my logo, with my brand, and so you're buying that product. Would I go into a Louis Vuitton and say, well, I just want to buy the purse at cost because that's what I should have to pay. It's just the cost. No, I wouldn't do that. It's the same thing. I'm providing a product. Yes, it's required to participate, but that's a part of the requirement. So I'm buying this product and that product is going to have a markup. There are a number of things that have to be done for that thing to be executed. So I've got to design the uniform. That is a long process, a back and forth. I've got to get a prototype. I generally have to pay for a prototype. I get the prototype in hand. We have to test it. We have to mock it up. We got to change some things. Then we got to go back into the drawing board and we got to fix some things. And then we've got to submit orders and we've got to size. And then we've got to sort the things when they come in. And then we've got to distribute. And all of that stuff takes time and energy. And every single bit of time is value. And so we have to mark up from the at cost price. If you're buying a uniform that is so expensive that you can't mark it up, then you need to buy a different uniform. And I know that's like some people feel targeted by that statement, but I get that there's beautiful uniforms out there. There are companies out there that make absolutely stunning uniforms that cost $750. I don't think you need a $750 uniform. You need to calculate you need to figure out what the cost is, and then you need to figure out what your healthy profit margin is on that, or your markup really. And from that markup, what is profit? What's going to actually stay within the business and what goes towards, from that increase in price, what is going towards covering your staff time and those other things. That's for individual products. Like I said, other products, you're going to divide them out. Now, competition fees. Competition fees should absolutely be marked up. There are a number of expenses that go into competitions. You have to register. You have to create your rosters. You have to print all of your stuff. You have to have your staff there the night before. You have to do all of those other things that go towards comp fees. So I never charge exactly what the competition charges me. There is always an additional increase on that price tag, additional markup for comp fees. When you're setting comp fees, my personal recommendation is set a budget of whether it's $800 or $900 that goes towards paying just the comp fees. with your markup in there. And then that can contribute to 5 competitions or 6 competitions, depending on where you're competing and what brand you're using. Figure out what your budget is and how many competitions you can commit to doing, and then stick to that and make sure that you have an increase. Also, that increase in price. So let's say you really are able to spend $800, but you're charging $1,000 in competition fees per person. That extra gives you leeway for maybe the price was underestimated a little bit and it's actually $20 more per person. Well, now that extra money is $20 less. So you're forecasting, because we have to read into the future what pricing is going to be. You're setting yourself up for success. So you're not going to be in the negative, because if you're in the negative on competition fees, that can suck. Like if you fail to budget correctly and you're off by like $100 or $200, the next thing you know, you have a $20,000 bill and you don't have the money. So you have to get that right. You cannot be wrong on things like competition fees, especially if you're competing at events that are $150, $175 per athlete and you fail to budget correctly. You're either going to be short money, or you're going to have to tell your parents that they have to pay more, or you're going to have to tell your parents that we're pulling back on one of the competitions. So I would always recommend under promising and over delivering. I would rather say I can guarantee we're going to go to 5 events and then maybe add a 6th one once the pricing all comes out, than tell people we're going to go to 7 events and realize we have to go down to 5 because I didn't budget appropriately. You also should be charging for coaches fees. Now you can build those into your comp fees, but you need to figure out what it costs you to have coaches go to competition, travel. So are you paying mileage? Are you paying for flights? Are you paying for hotels? What are you paying the coaches per day? Are you giving them per diem for food? What are all of those expectations and what are those costs? You need to figure out what those are. You again need to have an additional percentage that you add to that, or additional dollar amount that you add to that. So you have a little bit of cushion for yourself. You have a profit margin, and you are correctly budgeting for your coaches to go to events. Failing to account for these things can be monumentally damaging to your bottom line. You have to make sure that you have accounted for all of these things. And if you have parents who are saying, why should I have to pay for coaches to go to a competition? The answer is because it's their job. It is their job to coach. You are the customer who is paying for the service. That is part of the service. If you want me to wrap it all up into one thing so you don't know where it's going, that's fine. But that would be like saying, well, why does the chef have to cook my meal? That's what they do. The coach has to go to competition. Otherwise, you won't have a coach. And I cannot require anyone. It's illegal to require my staff to volunteer their time because they're paid employees. So I am not going to do that. And therefore, there is going to be a charge to get them there. The only way the business has any money is if the clients pay the business. That's just capitalism. You need to make sure that you're building in every single one of those things and you're being very, very diligent. I would way rather release my information for a season and give people a ballpark of what things are going to cost, as opposed to a specific cost sheet and say it's going to be between $4,000 and $6,000, which is a massive difference, right? Or I'd rather say, hey, this year it was, in my head, I go, this year it was, $5,300 total for the season. Next year's not going to be more than $6,300. Well, then when I come out with my cost sheet and it's not $6,300, it's like, oh, okay, that's a relief. I was a little bit stressed. That was a lot of money, but like 56, that sounds a little bit more reasonable. I can basically price anchor and get people to see the value at a higher rate, and then I can come back with a lower offer. So there's a way to pitch that to them. And I'm again gearing up my client to understand what we are delivering and what the price is without giving them all the nitty gritty details. So I have wiggle room to determine what each thing is going towards. Now, maybe you're a gym that doesn't give people that detailed breakdown. We do. We say this much of your money is going to comp fees. This much of your money is going to coaches fees. This much of your money is going to uniform. This much of your money is going to camp. And we just detail this much of your money goes to choreography, this much to music. So they know what it is that they're paying for and where that money is going. And that's how we break it up. Our uniform years are more expensive than our non-uniform years. That is just the reality of the sport. We don't have an additional fee. Some teams will do uniform years, and on non-uniform years, they'll do things like a residential camp. So the price basically kind of stays the same, but then one year they're getting a uniform, one year they're getting a camp or something like that. There's a lot of ways you can do it. But the key is you have to budget correctly, because very, very quickly, a $20 oopsie, a $100 oopsie times 100 kids adds up very, very quickly. So you want to make sure that you're setting those prices correctly, and you're also building in a actual, like, you're marking it up, you have a profit margin, and you know what's going to stay within the business, because you need profit margin on every single thing. Every single thing you've got to build in that profit margin. So we are really focused on this right now. The other reason we're really focused on this right now is we are already planning for the 25-26 season. If you're not planning for the 25-26 season, I would encourage you to start. We are getting into February, which means people are starting to look, people are starting to determine where they might go cheer next year, and they want information. And if you're not the one providing the information, you're going to be behind the curve. So if you're listening to this and you haven't yet worked on your all-star packet, you haven't yet set your pricing, you haven't gone down this path, then I'm just going to shamelessly say, join the Next Generation Gym Owners Academy. I just did a masterclass on building an amazing all-star packet. That is something that all of our Academy members have access to, and have access to all-star packet templates that are designed to convert people into paying members in your gym. We can walk you through the pricing. We can help you get those things set up. And if you need to do it diligently, it is the biggest thing you can do to set yourself up for success. The decisions that you make right now in regard to how you set up your teams, how you set up your pricing, how you set up your assessments, those are the decisions that are going to determine whether or not you are super stressed out in January, February, and March financially. So the decisions you're making now are going to impact 2026 in a great way. And I want to see you in 2026 thriving, not trying to figure out how you're going to make ends meet. All right, everyone, I appreciate you joining me for this episode. I appreciate you listening to me lecture you about pricing. It is something that I am very passionate about. Again, please pick up my book. It would mean the world to me. I do want to thank all of you that listen to this podcast regularly. That also means the world to me. It would not be possible without all of our listeners and all of our people supporting us and helping us do what we do. So it is not lost on me that many of you take an hour to a couple hours a week out of your days to listen to me talk about cheer and about my experiences and give you advice. So thank you for allowing me into your life. And with that, we will catch you on the next episode.